It was rumored that Danny Lee Kyllo grew the best weed in all of Oregon. In the early 90s, his product was famous for coming with strict instructions: smoke only, no baking, no brownies. It was so strong that a single toke produced a strange high, one that could both settle your nerves and heighten your senses. If you smoke just a little too much, you start feeling agoraphobic and claustrophobic at the same time. Kyllo's weed found local infamy when a parent reportedly found her teenage son, high as hell, nestled in the corner of the room gibbering, "I no longer know what there is behind the wall. I no longer know there is a wall. I no longer know this wall is a wall. I no longer know what a wall is. I no longer know that in my room there are walls, and if there weren't any walls, there would be no room." By 1992, the product had spread from the inner city and permeated deep into the suburbs, catching the attention of the police officers as it wafted outwards. Eventually, the police received a tip-off to Kyllo's whereabouts, and one night, as he was attending to his weeds and replacing a bulb in one of his high-intensity heat lamps, the police were outside on a stakeout. With the curtains drawn and no search warrant, nothing unlawful could be detected from the exterior of the property. A year prior to this stakeout, a law was passed that allowed the police to acquire surplus equipment from the military. Assault rifles, Humvees, choppers, boats and sniper scopes began transforming police departments into combat-ready infantry units. And this is how an as yet unused Ajima Vision 210 thermal imager found its way into the trunk of the unmarked police car outside Kyllo's home. Conscious that it would be considered trespassing if they were to set foot inside the boundary of his private property, the officers creeped up as close as they could get, and with their legs pressed against the outer surface of the well-worn, waist-high wooden perimeter, they peered through the viewfinder of the military-grade thermal camera. The exterior wall of Kyllo's home appeared to be aflame. The image was saturated with white-hot amorphous blobs that loosely marked the outline of the high-intensity heat lamps beating down on the weeds behind the wall. Kyllo was arrested, but it wouldn't be for another 10 years until he received his final verdict. His case went up through the entire court system, eventually ascending to the Supreme Court, where Kyllo's hot wall became a matter of constitutional magnitude. The debate came down to one seemingly irresolvable technicality. Was the heat that passed through the wall of his home into the air outside public or private property? The contest in court became like that Orson Welles film, the one where Charlton Heston plays a Mexican and has to figure out if a murder in no man's land happened in Mexico or America. Well, here the internal fabric of the wall became the grey legal area, not between two nations, between that of public and private space, between the technologies permitted for police work at home and those used by the military abroad. Kyllo walked free, and it was ruled that anything migrating through a wall, be that liquid, heat or sound, that was not detectable by human senses unaided by technology, was a breach of the border that separates the home from the city, the private from the public. It has since been invoked to protect the information stored behind the screen of your phone and even behind the membranes of your skin, while the police officers continue to buy technologies designed to make Iraqi and Afghani walls invisible and Iraqi and Afghani bodies transparent.
Well, I think that's a very dangerous road to go when we start talking about imagers and technology, because what it's capturing really is molecular information that migrates through our walls. Therefore, if we are now saying that we can capture that kind of information without a warrant, we can reduce our whole world to that type of wave and molecule, and our walls mean nothing.
In the year 2000, construction began on tens of thousands of kilometers of border wall. was to be called the Great Belize, Guatemala, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Brunei, Limbang, Bulgaria, Turkey, Morocco, Spain, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, China, Korea, Egypt, Gaza, Estonia, Russia, Macedonia, Greece, Malaysia, Thailand, Hungary, Serbia, Hungary, Croatia, India, Bangladesh, India, Burma, India, Kashmir, Iran, Pakistan, Israel, Area C, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Saudi Yemen, Saudi Iraq, Slovenia, Croatia, Turkey, Syria, Turkey, Iran, Turkmen, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Russia, UAE, Oman, Mexico, United States, wall. And as these walls are being constructed, millions and millions of invisible cosmic particles called muons descended into the Earth's atmosphere and penetrated meters deep through layers of concrete, soil, and rock. Scientists realized that these deep penetrating particles could be harvested and a technology could be developed to use their peculiar physical capacities to pass through surfaces previously impervious to X-rays. Muons allowed us to see for the first time the contraband hidden in lead-lined shipping containers and the secret chambers buried inside the stone walls of the pyramids. Now, no wall on Earth is impermeable. Today, we're all wall and no wall at all.
And to me, the cry, my lady, it was a cry of pain.
May I ask you this, Miss Motronic? Was the crying soft, loud, low pitch, high pitch, low tone, high pitch?
The crying was very loud and very close. I even remember, I even thought it could be inside the house. It was very loud and very, very close.
And the pitch of the crying?
It was very loud.
When I consulted with you, I asked you if you can just make resemble that noise what you heard. And I know it won't be as loud, but just to give the court some idea what you heard.
The crying was like,
On Valentine's night, 2013 in Pretoria, South Africa, Michelle Berger awoke to the sound of a woman screaming, followed by a volley of 4 gunshots. She recreated those screams she heard that night in a court of law when the event she witnessed became the subject of a murder trial. It was the trial of the athlete Oscar Pistorius, and it was dedicated to discovering if he had intended to kill Reeva Steenkamp through the bathroom wall or if it was an accident. Pistorius testified that he believed he was shooting at an armed intruder behind the wall when he shot his girlfriend. The wall became the last line of his legal defense, and accepting that he could not see through the wall, the attention of the court turned to how permeable the structure was to the sound of her voice. The wall was built from 20-centimeter thick concrete masonry blocks, through which a scream would likely lose much of the frequencies that contain the distinct characteristics of a human's voice. However, the bathroom wall had a bathroom door, and the bathroom door was a 3-centimeter thick, medium-density fiberboard with a millimeter-thin veneer. This door is not only weak enough to allow the sound of that intensity to pass through its fibers, but of the frequencies it's able to block, absorb, and deflect, it is weakest at preventing the low to mid-range frequencies of the human voice from passing through. The dip of the door's acoustic absorption perfectly matched the peak intensity of Steenkamp's scream, so the weakest point of this wall was a hole perfectly sized for a female voice to squeeze through. The door and the wall filtered her voice, but in doing so, intensified it, blocking entirely his capacities to see her, yet paradoxically amplifying the intensity at which he could have heard every idiosyncrasy of her scream.
My name is Ronald Reagan. Last year, the contributions of 16 million Americans to the crusade for freedom made possible the World Freedom Bell, symbol of hope and freedom to the communist-dominated peoples of Eastern Europe, and built this powerful 135,000-watt Radio Free Europe transmitter in Western Germany. This station daily pierces the Iron Curtain with the truth, answering the lies of the Kremlin and bringing a message of hope to millions trapped behind the Iron Curtain. The Crusade for Freedom is your chance and mine to fight communism. Join now by sending your contributions to General Clay, Crusade for Freedom, Empire State Building, New York City. Or join in your local community.
Remember, the Iron Curtain isn't soundproof. Radio Free Europe gets the truth through.
During the Cold War, radio waves were used to transgress the thousands of kilometers of border wall that divided Europe. The forces of the West built broadcast stations in Munich and Lisbon, while here in the east of Berlin, the Soviet bloc constructed a huge radio recording facility. This was the largest complex of radio studios in the world at that time, and it was dedicated to creating radiophonic propaganda that could leak throughout the Soviet bloc, seep through the Berlin Wall, and bleed into the apartments in the west of the city. In their day, these sound studios were the most advanced example of radio architecture, in which almost any acoustic world could be conjured. The floors were divided into multiple surfaces in order to be able to create the sound of footsteps on gravel or wood, marble or sand, snow or tiles. Creating the sounds from outside, inside, rooms in which an arrangement of modular partitions could create acoustic spaces of any shape and size, rooms where the walls themselves could revolve, transforming between different surfaces that could reflect and reverberate the rich diversity of life on the other side of the wall. During those same years, the East German Republic also perfected the acoustics of incarceration, building a prison where the walls were used as weapons, creating prisoners who see nothing but hear everything, who were both completely confined and yet totally exposed. They exported and built this archetype throughout the 60s and 70s in the Eastern Bloc, in Colombia, in Angola, in Egypt, in Lebanon, and in Syria. The combination of its German origins and its three-pronged star design meant that wherever it was built, they locally referred to it as the Mercedes-Benz of prisons. In 2016, I learned the full extent of this acoustic architectural design when I began an acoustic investigation into a prison that was modeled on this GDR archetype. The Mercedes-Benz of prisons in Syria, the one I investigated, is called Saydnaya, and since the beginning of the 2011 protests, the regime has used it as a torture prison and execution center. The prison is inaccessible to all except those detained there and those detaining them, and the only way to access what's happening inside its walls is through the memories of a small selection of detainees who were one day unexpectedly released. These survivors were blindfolded as they entered and exited. Most of them never left their cell for the entire period of their imprisonment, and so they only ever saw the four walls of their cell. With these walls becoming the limits to their visual world, they had to train their ears to surpass them, listening to every sonic sign and signal, to try and gather as much information about the place in which they were incarcerated, the people who were incarcerating them, and the forms of torture they were being subjected to.
الأصوات اللي كتير مهمة، صوت عم يجي لعندك من ورا الحيط، صوت ضرب. أول ما تسمع صوت ضرب أنت بتضل حاطط إذنك إنه هذا الضرب حيتكرر لأكثر من مكان ولا خلص بس بهذا المهجع. إذا ضربوا هذا المهجع ورجعوا ضربوا وإجا الصوت رد نفسه من مهجع تاني فأنت عارف إنه أنت هلا جايك دور الضرب.
مو هيك صوت لسع، لا صوت تكسير يعني مثل اللي ماسك عصايه عم يضرب هيك بقوه على هي الطاوله، فما بتسمع صوت انه شيء عم يضرب بالجسم، بتسمع شيء عم يضرب مثل اللي عم يهد حيط، يعني مثل اللي ماسك مهده هي وعم يهد، تسمع هيك الصوت تماما. يعني ما تسمع انه صوت واحد عم يضرب الثاني بكبل او صوت او كرباج، ما بتسمع هذا الصوت اللسع، ما بتسمعه، بتسمع صوت هد. حتى انه نحن كنا نقول لحالنا يعني انه معقول هذا عم ينزل على بني ادم هذا الصوت هذا كله. هلا اللي بيكون عم ياكل الضربه ما بتقلهم، بس مو مثل اللي عم يسمعها، يعني اللي عم يسمعها بيرتعب جدا من الصوت انه هيك على الجسم.
هيدا الضرب ولا هيدا
لا هي الضرب عم يضرب هذا. لا عم يضرب على الرجلين او على الظهر او على الجسم، عرفت علي؟ أما بالنسبة للبوري البلاستيك هذاك فبيكون الصوت يعني بدك تجيب يعني شاكوش كبير وتضرب فيها على الجدار أو شغلة مثل عم تخرب جدار كويس حتى نفس الصوت بيطلع. بتعطي نوع من الإرهاب يعني للسجناء وبتعطي صدى يعني بحيث ما تبين الضرب وين، إن كان بالطابق العاشر ولا الطابق العاشر تحت الأرض ما بنسمع يعني ما ببين، لأني بصير المبنى بصير يعني شلون بدي أوصف لك يا برج، المبنى بصير يعني بيطلع الصوت من الجدران فما بتقعد بتميز أنت عجب فوق ولا تحت. بصير المبنى هو بيعطي صدى، الجدران بتعطي صدى للصوت.
For a sound to vibrate the walls of a room from 2 stories above through security-grade thick concrete, it would need to be of a magnitude that no human strike can create. And yet all of the witnesses insisted to me that the walls of their cells shook from the beatings that took place in distant and unlocatable areas of the prison. Later I understood why. The shape of the building, the dimensions of the corridors, meant that sounds made in the cells are reflected towards a central tower. This is a listening tower, allowing guards positioned here to hear everything happening in all the cells across the 3 wings. This listening tower has a staircase spiraling all the way from the basement to the roof, and it creates an opening, and so a great column of air stands in the center of this building. All the sounds made in the prison are by design directed towards this listening tower, making this column of air act like a huge megaphone, funneling and forcing sounds throughout the 3 wings in ways that defy proximity. The sometimes shrill hiss of a whisper spoken in cell A, wing 3, could be heard louder in wing 2, for example, than in its neighboring units. There was one sound, however, that wherever it occurred, all the cells in each of the 3 wings would hear it. This was the sound of the thick green plastic plumbing pipe striking a human body. As it is completely forbidden in Saydnaya to utter a sound of pain when one is being tortured, witnesses heard only the sound of this 0.5 centimeter thick pipe with a 4 centimeter hole in the middle striking a corporal surface. At the moment of its percussion, its vibrations catapult the air out of both ends of the hollow pipe, creating a blast wave like the gases firing out of the muzzle of a gun. The walls shudder, not from the force of the strike, but from the blast's resonance. This sound then fires out of the cell, funnels into the column of air, and spirals round the central listening tower, where it becomes broadcast throughout the prison from the group cells on the 3rd floor to the solitaries in the basement. As it dissipates, it loses its initial crack, and what is left to bleed into the cells below is a muddied thud. A muffled, low-mid frequency booms through the prison at 250 Hz, the exact frequency with which the walls of Saydnaya are built to vibrate, creating the illusion that the sound is emanating from within the walls themselves. By the time the sound of torture reverberates in the lower floors and distant wings, it becomes dominantly felt as vibration rather than heard as sound. As torture rings through the porous and yet inescapably solid membranes of this structure, it doesn't sound like something hitting a body, Jamal explains. It feels like someone is demolishing a wall.